The International Criminal Court says former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte is now in its custody after he arrived at a detention center in the Netherlands. Mr. Duterte was arrested on Tuesday after the court alleged that he created, funded, and armed death squads from his time as Davao City mayor until he was president. These squads purportedly killed thousands of supposed drug users and dealers. The arrest comes amid a bitter feud between members of the Marcos and Duterte political dynasties. The rivalry escalated after Mr. Duterte's daughter and Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte said in November that she had contracted an assassin to kill current President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. if she herself were to be killed. For more on the growing tensions between the Duterte and Marcos clans, let's speak to Ronald Holmes. He's professor at the Department of Political Science and Development Studies at De La Salle University. Professor Holmes, thank you for making the time to speak with us. Let's start off with what's happened. The Philippine government insisting they were following orders in providing this arrest for the ICC. But from a domestic point of view, how much of a role does Mr. Duterte's arrest have to do with his political feud with the Marcos family?
Undeniably, it has something to do with that feud, no? Because the current president, Bongbong Marcos, had a different position at the start of his term. He basically said that he will not cooperate with the International Criminal Court. So in that sense, after the feud started, and this was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, even as early as 2023, there have been certain changes in terms of his pronouncements from the point that they will allow ICC investigators to come in. And of course, the most recent one is that it's in compliance with the Interpol red notice.
How and why did the political alliance between the country's two most powerful dynasties fall apart?
Well, many of the political alliances among our elites elected into office are marriages of convenience. No? It's a weak alliance to begin with. It's largely meant for the purpose of securing electoral victory. They have competing interests, but those competing interests will be sidelined. Essentially with the intent of securing electoral victory. In this case, Bongbong Marcos and Sara Duterte drew support from their bailiwicks, Bongbong Marcos in the north and even in the National Capital Region in 2022, and Sara Duterte in Mindanao and some areas in the Visayas. So it was expected that there would be some conflict. It happened quite early, maybe, but the feud was expected to happen because, everyone among them, at least the national officials, will be gearing towards the next presidential elections, which is actually 6 years down the line. But this one came out early, as I said. I think it started in May 2023 when there was a purported coup against the cousin of Bongbong Marcos, the Speaker of the House, Martin Romualdez, which led to the replacement of then Deputy Senior Speaker Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo, our former president, as Deputy Senior Speaker.
So this alliance was never expected to last. You mentioned the upcoming election in 2028. That presidential race still 3 years away, but midterm elections are coming up in a few months, in May. How crucial is that vote, and how could things play out given these latest developments?
Well, it's critical with respect to one developing event, and this is the impeachment trial of the vice president, because the impeachment trial will be held, the court that will hear the trial, the impeachment case, will be the Senate. And half of the Senate will be elected in May 2025. So it's a question of whether those who will be elected are more or less going to follow the prescriptions, or at least the inclination of the incumbent administration, or whether they will take an independent stance. It's a pretty difficult task for the eventual judges in the Senate, because they will have to weigh very closely the support that the Dutertes will have in their own bailiwicks, as well as the incentives or even reprisal on the part of the administration. So definitely, these elections will be quite critical with regard to that particular impending case, impeachment case against the vice president.
Do you think Sara Duterte can survive this impeachment trial?
Well, you cannot rule out survival because, as I said, there are 24 eventually judges there, and all of those 24 judges will weigh the case relative to their own political interests, their own political survival. Over the past few months, we've seen a decline in terms of the levels of trust and approval for both the president and the vice president. Somehow, in the last few months, the vice president's approval had gone back to majority approval, as against, let's say, less than majority approval for the president. So we don't know what the impact of this arrest would be. It's being projected as a persecution by those who are supporting Duterte, whether this projection would mobilize support from people that they've communicated with. No? Their projection, additional projection, is that criminality is back, and that the weakness of the current administration is the cause of such problem, aside from the fact that the administration has not addressed an urgent issue, which is the high prices of basic commodities or goods and services. So we won't know until the next few months how it will play out. No? The possibility that Sara would survive the impeachment trial would depend largely on the narrative that she and her supporters and lawyers will win. It will also depend on the evidences to be presented in the impeachment trial by the prosecutors who are coming from the lower house.
Professor, in your point of view, is this the beginning of the end of the Duterte dynasty?
Well, that's even a harder question, Rani, because dynasties normally don't die in the Philippines; they fade away and then they recover. Just recall the Marcoses. No, the Marcoses were deposed in an rather humiliating manner in 1986, but they slowly clawed back their way to national politics. It took a little more time. The Dutertes, many of them are in local positions. They have a stronghold in Davao City. They have so much support in Mindanao. So I don't know. Maybe Rodrigo Duterte will stay in The Hague for quite some time. Maybe Sara Duterte might be convicted in the Senate trial, but there are more Dutertes there. And we've seen that in terms of political families in the Philippines, there's a tendency for them to survive. And in a country where you have 80% of the provinces governed by political clans, the alliances among them will be more crucial in terms of putting up or scaling up the level of influence of the more prominent ones, including the Dutertes.
Thank you, Professor, for sharing your insights with us. We were speaking to Ronald Holmes, professor at the Department of Political Science and Development Studies at De La Salle University.